the Philippines that is growing as well. You know, Vietnam has a similar profile and as a similar growth profile at 6.5 to 6.7 GDP for 2010, and its population is just about the same range as the Philippines at about 95 million. So, you know, these two nations alone are some of the areas that Tholons are closely looking at as domestic sources for the service providers. Okay, so let's move on to slide 7 then. Okay, so on this slide, we've just identified a few key cities and delivery locations in Asia, and you know, as Asia is strongly positioned to facilitate growth from both the supply and the demand side. So, you know, again, we see Bangalore and Delhi NCR, Mumbai, Manila, and some of the incumbents, some of the emerging cities like Dalian in China, which has been providing a tremendous amount of ITO activity in recent years. And interestingly, for this year's Top 100 report, we're also looking at what we call on-the-radar cities. So these are the smaller Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities who are fast emerging in the services outsourcing landscape. And you know, there's a couple of cities in the Philippines, for example, Iloilo City and Santa Rosa, and a couple more Indian cities that we're very fond of. And of course, there are the emerging cities as well, or what we consider as new cities in the outsourcing landscape. Now, each city category has its own unique characteristics, right? So, for the larger cities, it's going to be the innovation and time to market. I mean, obviously, these cities will have the capabilities and capacities of scale to provide services at a much faster clip than some of the smaller cities. And for the mid-range or the mid-sized cities or the emerging cities, the cost optimization and growth would be the greatest value for the clients. On the Tholons radar cities, and because these cities are relatively smaller or significantly smaller, I should say, than some of the emerging or established cities, some of the value propositions for the clients would be on the specific niche skills that these cities or delivery locations can provide. I mean, because these smaller cities are unable to scale or don't have the capacities of scale as some of the larger cities, they're oftentimes much more focused in delivering very specific outsourced processes than you know, some of the larger cities like Bangalore or Manila or Cebu City even. Okay, so moving on to slide number 8. Okay, let me just wait till it populates a little. There we go. Okay, so the concept here is basically of service clusters or service delivery clusters, that we like to call it in Tholons. So if you look at the circle, 10 years ago, this service delivery cluster in Asia would probably have been a rectangle stretching from India, Sri Lanka on one end and extending to the Philippines on the other end. Today, however, the cluster has evolved into a much larger delivery circle and composed of multiple nations providing a multitude of services and catering to a diverse group of global markets and verticals. So what we should see in the near term is for delivery or service cluster to further expand, and we should see similar service delivery clusters emerge across the globe. Now, each service delivery cluster will be developing their own niche and market segment. Eastern Europe, we expect, will be an R&D and engineering cluster for Western European clients. South America will be a service cluster serving its regional demands and fulfilling North American voice BPO requirements. And China will continue to extend its reach to the increasingly lucrative North Asian markets of Japan and South Korea. Now, an interesting point to note here is that these clusters will also be a catalyst for growth for respective regions. So, you know, the same way that the India and Sri Lanka and the Philippine cluster catalyzed growth of services outsourcing in the region, we should also see the same for the for the other global service clusters. So one way to look at this is how the service delivery locations, how there's been a trickle effect on locations in terms of service delivery. So if you look at the Philippines, for example, where the Manila NCR was traditionally the primary or the tier 1 service cluster, and then as that location grew and expanded and somewhat saturated, alternative locations within that country since emerged, right? So now we have Cebu City, Bacolod, and some other outliers from the Manila NCR. So this trickle effect not only happens from within a country, but it also happens from it also trickles to or happens towards neighboring countries. So India, for example, would have been the primary service delivery destination, and then you would have Sri Lanka getting or the spillover from India and benefiting from India's presence in the global landscape. Yeah, so we should see that specifically in Southeast Asia. We should see that in Indonesia, Thailand, and a few other of the outliers from the Philippines benefit from that. And I think that's a good transition also now for Jonathan's piece and Jonathan's segment now, as he'll be discussing the emerging clusters and service delivery locations in the Asia Pacific region.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Manuel. Ni hao and mabuhay. I think that sets the tone for the next couple of slides that will be discussed. So the continuous demand, as discussed in the earlier slides by Manuel, has led to the proliferation of outsourcing locations in Asia. India, however, continues to lead the pack, followed by the Philippines, China, as well as other cities catering to both global and domestic requirements. A lot of emphasis was given by Manuel on the domestic market being serviced within China, and a lot of people who have actually located in this particular country are more interested in getting a piece of the action from the domestic side rather than catering to the global requirements. So if we now look at slide number 10, this is actually a good segue to introduce the Asian cities in the top 100 list. If you go through South Asia, which is more or less the Asian cities in the top 100 study would include a lot of cities in India, among them Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad, Pune. And of course, there are some segments that are coming from the Philippines, which basically alludes to what Manuel has been discussing earlier. Now, the Philippines Manila NCR is also consistently ranked as one of the top outsourcing destinations since 2007. It's also considered as a very mature location for outsourced services. China, on the other hand, follows India in terms of the most number of cities included in the list, and China currently has 7 cities on this list. These include Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Dalian, Guangzhou, Chengdu, and Tianjin. Dalian has been consistently moving up the ranking since 2007, ranking 12th in 2009, moving past Chandigarh and Kolkata, which is 15th, and Colombo, which is now on the 17th rank. These are cities which are moving. There are also cities that are moving down the rankings in the Asian region. Kolkata, for instance, moved from 5th in 2007 to 15th in 2009, and the same happened to Colombo, from 7th place in 2007 down to 17th in 2009. Now, what does these movements tell us? These movements are a clear indication of the increase in competition among outsourcing cities. This also indicates the aggressiveness of these cities in marketing their location as the location of choice for outsourcing services. And we could see that there are fast movers going up from the original list that we once generated to where it is now. Slide 13 basically discusses what Manuel has mentioned as those in the Tholons radar. There are more cities on the radar in the top 100 study. 4 more cities from Southeast Asia, 6 more cities from Southeast Asia, and 3 more cities from East Asia. Cities in Southeast Asia are mostly coming from the Philippines, however. And this could be more or less attributed to certain initiatives like the Next Wave Cities program of the Business Processing Association of the Philippines, or BPAP. For this year, for instance, Davao City was named as the #1 Next Wave City. And last year, if I'm not mistaken, that would be Metro Laguna. 3 cities outside the Philippines also make up the list for Southeast Asia. And that would be Jakarta, Indonesia, Bangkok, Thailand, which is also quite strong in animation, and Penang in Malaysia. Moving right along, as we go through East Asia, this would include Seoul, South Korea, apparently a location that has absolutely terrific bandwidth, Xi'an in China, of which I had the pleasure to be one of the speakers during the Xi'an Outsourcing Conference a few years back. Now, during the event, it was quite evident that the support of government was so overwhelming, and you could see that they're really coming together in terms of marketing and promoting Xi'an as an outsourcing destination. Last city on our radar for East Asia is Taipei in Taiwan. Now, South Asia obviously includes 4 cities in India. Bhubaneswar, the next one is a tongue twister, Thiruvananthapuram. Of course, Mysore is also on the list, as well as Ahmedabad. If we could move on to slide number 14, and allow me to actually discuss this quite thoroughly. The centers of excellence in the region have experienced tremendous growth and activity over the past few years. As stated during the webinar last week regarding Europe, the Center of Excellence is a location that would provide a significant advantage over others in terms of a process, or in the case of several cities, multiple processes. First, we go through the list of established centers, those that have a very high level of affirmation from client nations already. And if we could see on this particular slide, India basically has the lion's share with about 5 cities on this particular list having that distinction of being established. So we have on top is Delhi, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Pune. They have each more or less defined a core specialization for them for each particular location. Delhi, for instance, would have a huge level of customer support, business analytics, software development, product development, as well as engineering services. This has become very reliable to the point that companies like Oracle, Accenture, HP, Amdocs, just to name but a few, have called Delhi home in terms of servicing their outsourcing requirements. Now, application development, engineering services, product development, software testing, as well as a bit of contact support is pretty much embedded in Hyderabad already. Again, Accenture's there, Capgemini, TCS, Wipro, Infosys, Symphony, just a few of the companies that located in Hyderabad and are currently doing their services from this particular location. Bombay has established a very strong reputation in terms of financial and accounting outsourcing, as well as financial analytics. And of course, more or less this boom in India would not be as big as it is now if it did not happen in Bombay. And the contact center support services more or less gave this the jump start. Again, some of the companies that have established in this particular area would be Capgemini, TCS, Accenture's there as well, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, as well as IBM Dash. Bangalore would have software development, research and development, as well as contact support services as well. And just to go through the list, Sun Microsystems,